Forks Police Department is investigating the death of an 18-year-old after a suspected drug
According
overdose.
to the Grand Forks County Coroner's Office, Alex Davis died from a fentanyl overdose. The 22-year-old who was found unresponsive of a Grand Forks teenager sparked an investigation that is being connected to an international...
Here is the criminal complaint that links the powerful opiate from China to Portland to Grand Forks.
From an overdose of fentanyl, which is often prescribed as a painkiller.
Well, I guess once I started doing it, you know, like by myself, you know, and I was starting to become like stingy about it. Like, no, this is mine. Like, I'm not sharing with anybody. It's a lonely, lonely world, you know. Being an addict, you're lonely. I mean, and your drugs are your best friend because they get you out of that reality. I was a low down, dirty person then.
One of the big things that you lose is time that you're never going to get back, time that you can use prospering, or working towards your goal and working towards what you want. And I wasted it instead of spending it, investing my time. Drugs were a total waste. I have nothing to show but heartache and jail time and pain.
When I was 17, I started to experiment with heroin and fentanyl, which is kind of what sent me down a really rough path. Heroin and fentanyl both progressed really rapidly, actually. It went from, probably within a month, it went from trying it a couple times, or 3-4 times, to damn near daily. And that was all, I want to say, probably because of the people I was hanging out with.
I always thought of our house as like the safe place for kids to be. I always thought that if they're here, they're not getting in trouble. We know what's going on, that I really did. I used to think this can be a safe place for our kids, for their friends. And so when Evan actually passed away here in our home because of drugs, it was a shock to what I perceived our home to be. It wasn't the safe place that I thought it was.
I've worked narcotics over the course of the last 16 to 17 years in this area. Been involved with the meth labs and meth that was around in the late 90s, early 2000s, to the imported crystal meth that we're still seeing today. And over the last couple of years, the heroin and opiate-based medications on the street. Now we're seeing a big uptake in heroin. We're seeing heroin in amounts that we never saw a couple of years ago.
I think the first time I started using, like actually trying drugs, was about like 12, 13-ish. And that's when I first smoked marijuana. And I mean, it was just right off from there. It was just, you know, hanging out, so. Back in the day, like middle school, when I first started smoking weed, it was just for fun. It was like a social thing. You know, you meet up with your friends, let's smoke a bowl. It's a fun thing to do, or, you know? And then all of a sudden, you know, it got to the point where I needed it to get out of bed. And I knew that I was addicted and that it wasn't fun anymore. You're looking for that next high, and once that drops and you can't get any higher than you already are, you're like, oh, where's the next thing, you know? And I mean, like when I shot up for the first time, that's when I knew I'm at the point, because I mean, that's another level of addiction. Can I just tell you, like, you're at the point of no return. I'd have marks, you know, track marks. And so I'd wear long sleeves, and I mean, it just, it got bad. I was always chasing that next thing, you know. Yeah, I smoked weed for a period of time, like that's all I did. And then all of a sudden, you know, the weed wasn't enough. I needed a different high. I needed something else, you know, because feeling high was something that I really liked, you know, just to be in a different mind state. And then, you know, that's when I tried pills, and that was a different high. And it was something I liked a lot better than weed. And it just got worse and worse and worse.
People don't start using drugs because they say, I want to be a drug addict. They don't go into, you know, drug use because they say, well, someday I'm going to overdose, or these things just are a natural part of what happens when you get hooked on a medication that you can't control. I need to use because I need to feel good. I mean, the problem is that a lot of times people don't even feel good. They're just trying to not feel bad anymore after a while.
Initially got involved using substances. It was in 6th grade, and I had a best friend, and he had discovered that from being over at my house that my father smoked pot, and so we ended up snooping around and found a little pot and decided to smoke. It's gonna be fun. You're gonna like it. So I trusted him. I didn't feel I had to do it in order to be cool, but I definitely thought it was cool, and I thought it made me a little cooler. With pot, you know, I smoked because it was experimental, and I didn't do it for a long time. And then, you know, I was in a place and it was there, and I began to smoke it. And then, you know, the more you smoke it, the more you like it, and we began to look for it. I mean, it's much more expressible pattern with cocaine. I mean, it was something that we tried once, and it was pretty cool. You know, you can use it and you can get drunk longer. So we started doing it on weekends in high school, when we would go out and drink at parties. And then, you know, it was maybe once a month that we'd do it, and me and a friend began to do it like almost every weekend. It's like, it's the weekend thing to do. And then we started, you know, finding opportunities in the week. If we had a little extra money, let's get some cocaine. And, you know, you don't realize that it's becoming an addiction. You just think you're using it more because it's that much funner. And it progressed to the point, before I knew it, I'm using it every day. Initially, it was a fun thing to do, but that didn't last long. For some people, it can take years, but for me, it didn't last long before I started showing signs of addiction. I recognized having addiction because usage got me in trouble. I was a hard-headed young boy, and I did a lot of stupid things when I used. I was young and I knew everything. I knew everything about myself. And so I can control this. Growing up, I continued to see this pattern, and it became evident that I couldn't control it. So I knew when I hit my full-blown stage of usage, it added on a lot of depression, because I knew that I had a problem, and I knew I was addicted. I knew what I had become, and I was scared that it was going to be what identified me the rest of my life.
I've been around alcohol for my whole life. I mean, my dad's quite the alcoholic, and alcoholism just runs in my family. And I mean, my sister's a drug addict as well. So I mean, I've been around drugs my entire life. I mean, that's just kind of what I knew, honestly. And I mean, it wasn't like anything drew me to it. It just kind of happened. And I mean, once I got high for the first time, I mean, that I actually remember, I mean, I liked it. So of course, if you like something, I mean, you're most likely going to do it again or more often. So I mean, it just kind of took off from there after you try it. And I mean, addiction runs in my family, so I mean, I'm highly prone to addiction and to like the substances that I abused.
3 key factors that I absolutely look for is the biological genetic disposition. 40 to 50% of people who struggle with substance use disorder, research will show, come from a family history. So again, that conversation, if they have that, allows me to open up some doors in some of my assessment. If not, fine, we can kind of set that aside and move on. The other side is environmental. Where did they grow up? If they have a genetic disposition and they grew up in a family household where there was substance use, there could be potential abandonment, there could be potential person who had to raise a sibling because mom or dad or caregiver was out using or whatever it might be. Contentment wasn't built, the security wasn't built for some people who come from that, so environmental is huge. The other one is developmental. The earlier a person starts using, the more catch-up I have to work as a clinician in treatment to combat some of those issues that they've had. So when we holistically look at those 3 areas and a person's got 1, 2, or 3 of those, or all 3, it lets me have the language very clearly that we've got a lot of work to do.
By about 12 to 13, pot became about everyday thing, and drinking became like a weekend thing. The first time I ever used, yeah, there was a lot of pressure there. I said no a few times, and one of my really good friends just kind of pushed it onto me, and I gave in. I was like, yeah, you know what, fine, fuck it, whatever, what's one time? By the time I actually like got faded or high off heroin, I mean, I liked it a lot, and that's pretty much how it just became a daily thing. I mean, it got to that point where I was like, I can't like keep doing this because it's not for fun anymore. I mean, this is really screwing with me. I mean, I'm not even getting high anymore. It's more so just keeping me like alive and comfortable. And that's about when I realized like I had a problem and it wasn't just recreational.
Do you regret trying it?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So
That set my life, like that day kind of set my life down just a pretty fucked up path.
I guess for us it started when Evan was in high school. He and his twin brother both, they did some drinking, and then started moving into some marijuana usage, and that really got to be what was Evan's, primary issue, was using the marijuana. And at first it was hard to know, is this just, kids having fun and, being kids and making some dumb decisions and things like that. But it really started to progress for Evan, where it was starting to take over his life. He wasn't tending to school like he should. He was being more kind of defiant, and some problems at home and things like that too. And then he actually had gotten into some trouble with the law. And, for Evan, I guess we realized that it was a problem because instead of, having some consequences and then being able to curtail that behavior, he really didn't and really couldn't. Like, he continued to use, even though it was causing him a lot of problems.
I think it's safe to say that when students are abusing drugs, I've oftentimes seen where that becomes a higher priority in their lives and other things don't matter as much. I would say the biggest thing is everything else seems to become secondary, and the drug use and abuse becomes primary.
The way it started for him, it was about the fun. It was, he was the kid everybody wanted to be around. He was Mr. Funny. He made everybody laugh. And when he was drinking or maybe smoking some pot, that just added to that. And it really added to how he felt about himself. I think it kind of boosted his esteem in ways. Like, it really made him Mr. Funny, I don't think he acknowledged or realized to begin where this would take him. I don't think he realized the dangers of addiction, that at some point this isn't just about you having fun anymore. This is a beast that will take over your life, and pretty soon you're not in charge of this anymore. It will control you. And he realized that later. He realized that when he was going through his treatment programs and stuff. I think he realized at that point that it's not about fun and games anymore.
It was October 16th. My friend BJ from back home, we grew up together, and he was smoking weed and using also. I used to hook him up when he'd come to Grand Forks, like, oh, you want some weed? All right, here you go, I remember one day he asked me to hook up this guy. So one time I did it, and it was for BJ. And I was like, okay, that's the last time I'm meeting up with him because he's sketchy. One day that guy called me, and he was like, hey, can you hook me up with some weed? And I was really low down that day. I had no money, and I was really hurting. And I was like, oh, how much you want? He asked me for a ½ ounce. So he's like, well, can you sell 5 Xanax bars for me too? So I told him, all right, well, meet me at River Cinema in East Grand Forks. And they're like, all right, we'll go to a movie. I was like, it's going to take me 20 minutes to a ½ hour to run around Grand Forks and bring it back to you. Like, these people don't live in Grand Forks. I don't know whatever made them trust somebody to go around with their money, but they did. And so I met up with him. I mean, like, it's like a clear picture in my head now. Like, the day that it happened, I remember what I was wearing. I hopped off the car, I remember what he was wearing. And it was just scary. He, like, looked directly in my eyes. And it was like this, I, like, legitimately got scared. It was just like, it was like a bad aura. And so I took his money, went and got my pills, and I just got high. Whew, high. And it was about like 6 o'clock. BJ called me. I didn't answer. I was like, no, because he's going to freak out on me. I'll just wait till tomorrow, things cool off, and I'll just be like, hey, you know, I'm sorry. I thought he was stepping on my toe. That was my justification. He was stepping on your toes, calling you a drug dealer, so that's why I jacked him. He shouldn't have been calling me without your permission. You know, justification. But I didn't answer. A few minutes later, he texted me. He's like, Linz, it's Beach. Call me back ASAP. It's important. And I was like, no, I'm not calling him back. And it was about 8 o'clock. My cousin TJ called me. He's like, did you hear what happened? I'm like, no, what happened? He's like, BJ got shot. I was like, who did it? And he said his name. And that's the guy that I met up with earlier. It was the worst thing. I would never wish that on anybody, to have that kind of guilt and shame. I mean, like, it tormented me on a daily basis. On the 4th day, it was 4 days after BJ got killed, the sheriff's department in Cavalier called me, and they're like, we need you to come in. We got some questions we got to ask you. I pled guilty to 2 drug charges, 10 years probation. I'll be on probation for the rest of my life. I mean, I just, you know, I had some jail time that none of that fazed me. You know, I got pregnant during that whole thing. I got subpoenaed to testify against the guy that killed BJ. Had my son. I used throughout my whole pregnancy. And then I had my son. Had to go do jail time. I got out and I just didn't care. You know, I still haven't talked to BJ's family. I just don't know if that'll ever come. It was the hardest time of my life. I couldn't be a mother. Yeah, right. You know, and I mean, like, I still have this fear in the back of my mind that, you know, something's going to happen to my son because I caused somebody to lose their son. But I try not to think about that too much. But I just was using heavier than ever.
Students who maybe feel down, feel depressed, and aren't receiving counseling or aren't on medication and aren't following up with a medical doctor and don't know how to express their feelings. You know, I have seen firsthand where those students turn to illegal drugs and alcohol as a way to self-medicate, and in an attempt to try and feel better about themselves or their lives, and unfortunately that oftentimes does not help at all.
I mean, I look at my life as I'm living on borrowed time now, you know? Because if it wasn't for BJ, I wouldn't be here, you know? The exact reason why he died is because of my addiction. Like, he was one of my best friends, legitimately one of my best friends, you know? I used to watch Lion King because the teenage Simba laughed like him. And I used to watch it and I'd just sit there and I'd cry when I was missing him a lot. And I mean, like, I still can't watch Lion King because just the laugh, you know? But I catch myself and I'm like, dang, I forgot what he sounds like, you know? I forgot, you know? It's been so long. I don't even remember what he looks like, you know? And I mean, that's hard. But I know I'll see him again, you know, so.
At a younger age and all the way up until I was about 17, would have been going to parties, getting caught for a minor in consumption, and being brought home. I mean, those are always the rough times. My mom would sit there and scream at me, yell, like, what are you doing, blah, 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 you know, the whole spiel. Or you know, getting caught for possession, getting kicked out of school because I had weed on me. I mean, those were pretty much like the hardest times, but once I got into heroin, you know, 17, 18 years old, that's when things started getting a lot more difficult. I had to help one of my friends. You know, I gave him CPR and whatnot, and I had to call 911 because he had started to overdose, and that was really scary. He came back from it. You know, paramedics got there in time. That same night, actually, our friend had called me and said, you know, hey, Bailey's not waking up. I don't know what to do. I was like, okay, well, you know, call 911, right? Well, he's like, okay, whatever. So he calls me back like 5 minutes later, and he's like freaking out, panicking, and just being stupid. I can hear him running around his house and like going through drawers and shit. And he's like Bailey won't wake up. I was like, okay. I was right down the street. I made it to his house in a couple minutes, and I went to he opened the door for me. I went to the couch. That's where Bailey was, and I checked for a pulse. I couldn't find one, so I pulled him off the couch and I tried giving him CPR. At which time I told another friend of ours who was with me to call 911. And at that point, I mean, I realized there's not much I could do. I mean, he didn't have a pulse. He was already kind of cold, and I left. I mean, I panicked because I knew I was there for two people at the same night. You know, our friend David had overdosed and Bailey overdosed. I mean, it just kind of looked really bad for me to be at those two places at once. So I mean, I left, and then I got a call about 15 minutes later saying he was gone.
And when you see these overdoses and people come in, they're not breathing, you know, oftentimes there's very little that I can do. They've already been apneic. They've already essentially been, you know, brain dead. But people come in, they're young, they shouldn't be dying. They have their whole life ahead of them. I mean, we don't like to see anybody die ever. But it's really devastating. It's devastating to me. It's devastating to the nursing staff.
That's definitely the hardest thing I've ever gone through. I mean, Bailey's the one that lived with me for a while. I mean, he was my best friend at the time. And to have to go through that was really hard. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody, not even my worst enemy.
We've had quite a number of overdoses in the area. Even recently, especially the past year, it seems like there's been an increase. And in fact, I think we know nationally that there have been batches of heroin that have been mixed with some fentanyl. Fentanyl is an extremely powerful synthetic narcotic. And the problem with fentanyl is that it's dosed in such minute quantities that a few grains of the drug, you know, it makes a big difference in the amount of dose that you're getting.
I think what kids have access to now is so different than what we do. And our boys used to talk to us too, because I did more of the cautioning and stuff with them about, you know, you might have to choose different friends or, you know, be around different people if you want a different outcome. And they would point out that they would say, really, Mom, like most everybody is doing this. I don't think you understand how prevalent this is. And I would give the example of, you know, or suggest a name of a kid that I thought wasn't into that. And they're like, oh yeah, Mom, you just don't have a clue. The problem with drugs these days is that they don't know what they're taking. We've had kids die in this town from synthetic drugs, from the synthetic marijuana and things like that. We believe that when Evan died of the fentanyl overdose, that was the first time he tried fentanyl, that he'd never done that before.
I've never heard of fentanyl until
I hadn't either.
And then we did a little follow-up on it, and 50% of the children that try for the first time die.
You know, I have been in the emergency department at least twice this year, and probably I think 4 times in the last couple of years with overdoses of narcotics. And I've had 2 young people die this past year, and it's just awful to have to go into the room and look into the mom's eyes and say your daughter or your son is dead. And I'm suspecting that it's from a drug overdose. And You know, that's an awful thing to tell someone.
This isn't a law enforcement issue. This isn't a courts issue. This isn't a prison issue. This is a community issue to include treatment people, to include the courts, to include LE, to include everybody that has a bite to take out of this. Hospital staffing. And the hospital staff currently is seeing overdoses at record amounts right here in Grand Forks that no one ever hears about. Those incidences are occurring daily. And it's scary when you know the numbers.
At first, due to alcohol, I lost my sister in a car crash, and due to alcohol, I lost a lot of respect for myself and my family. Due to alcohol, I was never the parent I wanted to be initially to my daughter, and I lost my school. It took me a while to get into the program that I wanted, and what I had achieved, I lost it all in just a matter of a year. Just when my drinking escalated to a point of no return.
We know now that kids have died, or that people have died in our community from fentanyl, and people are continuing to use it.
No parent should have to go and find their son when you go to wake them up, like I have. It was the morning of July 16th.
2014, last year.
2014, last year. Like every morning, Evan worked construction, and so have I. I get up, I make his sandwiches and put his cooler on the table. I'd make mine. Then about the time I leave, because I had to drive a ways, I'd go down and get my son up for his job. And that morning, just like every other morning, I got up, I made his sandwiches, put his cooler on the table, got everything ready. Just before I leave, I go downstairs to wake him up for work. I go downstairs, I see the lights on down on the base in the bedroom, and I opened the door. Son, my boy, get up for work, and he wasn't moving. So I kicked the bed, because usually I just bed, and he gets up. Okay, Dad, he says, and he didn't move. So I went around to the front of the bed, and his eyes were open. And he aspirated already from the drug. And I grabbed him and turned him. And my son was already stiff. I let out a scream to his mother.
I was still in bed. I hadn't gotten up yet for work that morning. I heard him call out in a way that I have never heard in my entire life, and I knew something was really wrong. And so I ran out of bed too, and I ran downstairs, and I think he was in shock by then. And I went running in the room, and I saw Evan too, and I could tell that he wasn't alive anymore, and he was covered in blood and vomit. He had gotten sick, but he didn't even know it. His system had shut down, and Evan's twin brother was awake by then too. He'd heard the commotion, and so we were all just we were in shock and despair, and I called 911, and it was just all pretty surreal from there. We had officers and emergency responders and people in our home, and they took him out in a body bag by 8 o'clock that morning.
No parent should ever have to find that. And you think, as a teenager, that you know what's best for you. You don't realize the effect when something like that happens. what your parents go through, what your family goes through.
It's like my brain was fighting with itself. I didn't want to acknowledge that he had died. I just felt if I somehow didn't, I felt that if somehow I didn't acknowledge it, that it wouldn't be real. I didn't want to. I didn't want to know or to say that he died. When I called 911, I told the dispatcher, I said, I think my son might have died. I knew, and yet I couldn't even just say my son died because I didn't want it to be true. I don't believe for a minute that Evan would have taken fentanyl that night if he had known. That would have been the last thing he'd done. I don't believe for a minute that he would have done that. I wish kids would know and understand how it is dangerous, and you don't get do-overs. You don't get do-overs.
Addiction is something that once you get started, you will be chasing for the rest of your life. A young life is way too important to have that problem to go along with the rest of growing up. Growing up in this day and age is extremely difficult. And if you got the addiction to follow it, you're fighting an uphill battle that for the rest of your life you will be fighting.
When you talk to someone who has a moderate or severe criteria of substance use, none of them say this is what I plan for. Even talk to a nicotine smoker for 20, 30 years, they'll tell the younger person, don't start. So again, through those experiences, when we look at substance use disorder, nobody plans for that.
At the time, I didn't realize that I was like changing, but when I look back on it, I mean, I was a totally different person. I mean, like for instance, me and my mom used to be really close. I mean, she's been my best friend since I was a little kid. She raised me, you know, single parent. And I mean, I've lived with her my whole life. So I looked back, and when I was like using my harder substances, I mean, we lived together, but we'd go a couple days at a time without even speaking to each other. And I mean, that's really weird because I talk to my mom every day. And looking back on it, I mean, yeah, things were really different. I mean, I changed a lot as a person. I mean, I even became kind of an asshole at times too. It's really hard to just think back of how much those substances have changed my life and the experiences that I had to go through.
Evan dealt with a lot of shame. When he was going through periods where he was trying to find sobriety and trying to work programs, he would talk about that. He would talk about how shameful he felt, about how he had let the whole family down. About how he felt like he was such an embarrassment to our entire family. And I let Evan know many times that you know, my love for him was unconditional and it didn't matter. But obviously, even within families, there are people that don't understand this and make their judgments. And so that was hard on him. It was really difficult for him to deal with that shame. When he was in his treatment program, he did a 2-month treatment program out in California, and he did fabulous out there. He wanted to go to school for addiction counseling and social work, and he was on fire. He wanted to help the world. He was feeling really good about that.
And once he got back here, friends that he hung around with, when he left, started coming back around, and it just like he picked up right from day one from when he left. It doesn't, you don't ease back into it, I guess.
I said, "Hun, you need help again." And he said, "I know I do. I know I do." And we didn't we didn't have the opportunity to get him help because he passed away then before we got to that point again.
If I go way up north to North Dakota, across the country, there won't be any drugs there, and it seemed so initially before I had met people, because I knew my father and family, but as soon as I started going out to bars and drinking and meeting people, it's like it was everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's just not as openly used, but it's just as actively used. Addiction has no bias. It has no prejudice. It'll hit anywhere. Any class, society, any neighborhood, any type of family, whether you're spiritual or not, it hits.
No one is immune, and it can affect anyone in our community. And it doesn't matter if you're male or female or attend a North End school or a South End school or the alternative high school. It doesn't matter what your upbringing is. There's so many variables associated with what can cause a person to go down that path.
I would encourage anybody that's using drugs to look for help, and look for help right away. Get in touch with somebody. Have somebody that can work with you. There's a lot of resources out there, although it is hard. It is hard. It's not easy. It's not like you can't just walk into Walmart and buy a addiction kit off the shelf and, oh, I'm fixed. It takes a tremendous amount of work. It takes counseling, it takes support, and but it's worth it, because getting off the medication, getting off of the drugs is really the only real way to live a life.
Even in the times where I knew I wanted help, there was just this, growing up, there's this stigma with recovery. And it's like, oh, you're going to go to an AA group. It's like, you're going to go hang out with a bunch of losers where, if I would have walked into an AA group, 10, 12, 15 years before I did, I wouldn't have became the loser I thought were in those groups. I was becoming the loser and not knowing that those groups were full of people who were winning at life. I think if I would have had more support, I would have fell out of the path earlier. It wasn't until I was in college at the University of North Dakota that they advertised it's okay to need help, and the counseling center was a big thing. I mean, if they had counseling centers, I think in neighborhoods with friendly faces that people can resource. If the resource for help is there, I think it would be a lot easier. But again, you have AA meetings with stigmas attached, that it's like you walk in there, you're not someone that's trying to get help and better your life, you're a loser.
Talking to a school counselor is different than talking to anyone else in the school, in that the conversation is confidential as long as no one is at serious risk of harm. These are things we can talk about, and students, I'd like to think, know that, but maybe if they're involved in drugs and other risky behaviors, that might not be the first thing on their mind too, and they lose sight of who can I turn to.
This is an issue for all subcultures within our community. I mean, this is not a poor problem. This is not a rich problem. This is an everybody problem.
Substance use disorder in our nation is a public health issue. It's 90% of people who need treatment don't get it. 1 out of 3 American households are being impacted as we speak today. 375 individuals die every single day because of substance use disorder. It's the 3rd leading cause of preventable death in our nation. When we look at it in this idea of an overarching theme, it really gives us a clear message. I think no matter where we are, people will struggle with this.
No matter whether a student has or hasn't tried drugs, they can make a decision today while they're watching this video to change their life, and it'll have an impact on their life forever.
I feel like now that I'm clean and I'm working towards bettering myself and on the right path, my goals are so much more achievable. I mean, if I'm sitting there getting high and just hanging out with the same people every day, doing the same exact thing, I mean, I'm not going anywhere with my life. I really want to, you know, get my diploma and go to college. I really want to do some sort of biology, wildlife biology, marine biology, or yeah, just some sort of wildlife biology or science. So yeah, my goals ultimately are so much closer. Like I can grasp the idea of it and grasp the motivation to do it now.
Sometimes like I get down and out and I see myself as always going to have to deal with that. You know, they're going to put me in this box and I'm always going to have to live in this box because of the mistakes I made. But I mean, I think I've just gotten to the point in my life where I really don't care. You know, okay, if you want to think like that of me, go ahead. But I'm going to prove you wrong and you'll see that that's not who I am. Yeah, I used to do that stuff, but look where I am right now, you know? And when you can roll out of bed and just be happy that you're awake, I mean, that's one thing. But just to have, like, joy and happiness, like, to not have to, like, scream out and wonder why you have to do this again, that's enough, you know? And, I mean, to be able to, like, actually think of a future, like, dream, like, oh, my gosh, I'm not going to have to worry about drugs, you know? Because, I mean, that's just not an option anymore. Like, I've made that a point that that's not even going to be an option. I can legitimately say that I'm happy. I mean, you can think you're happy all you want using drugs, but it's time to be real with yourself. It's just, life is so beautiful as long as you're using it in the right way, you know?
I had dreams. I had goals. I wanted to do, I mean, the things that I'm working on now, the dreams that I'm reaching for, I had them then. And I don't think people would have been able to look at me and say, this guy wants to, you know, advance himself. And he's got a dream and he's going to have a career and, you know, he has a 5-10 year plan. And I always had it. I always wanted it. I've always had dreams. But at that moment, I think people saw me as just, you know, people would mention it. It's like, don't you have goals? It's like, of course I have goals. Of course I have goals. And it just, it seemed like because the usage was more important, that's what they saw. They didn't see someone who wanted success in life. They saw someone who wanted to successfully get drunk and high that night. What I tell my daughter is what I would want to tell every child, what I would want to tell myself at that age, that it's true, that it's real, that the first time you use can change your life. It can destroy your life and who you're going to become. Let them know of the dangers of it and how real they are. And I mean, for me, it's being open and saying, you know, before recovery, I was just, you know, it's hard, but it's like I was a terrible person. And, you know, not just the dangers and not just jail, but the brokenness, the depression that comes with it. Ask yourself the question, what do you stand to gain or lose? I mean, in reality, you can't gain anything from usage. You don't gain any single thing, but you stand to lose everything.
We struggled through the addiction because we struggled with somebody that wasn't Evan, but he was.
With my baby.
He was a great kid. He had a heart of gold. He loved everybody. He made everybody feel like they were someone special. If I had the opportunity to tell Evan anything right now, I would first want him to know how much I love him no matter what. But I really felt angry with him for so long after he passed away. I felt angry that he took a chance with his life like he did, that he used the fentanyl that killed him. I would tell him not to do it. I'd probably tie him up if I could and lock him away because I just want him back.